I promise you, $1 million is the lowest it can possibly be.
Million per coin by 2030, that still feels good to you?
Yes. Coins going to $1 million a coin and then $10 million a coin.
So yes, there's been a lot of people talking about the price of Bitcoin. This is my turn. But we're going to look at a realistic price point for Bitcoin utilizing a couple of bits of data throughout this cryptocurrency bull cycle. Basically for the next couple of years, not long term. I'll be using data and common knowledge, bit of common sense, but I will also look at pain points at why this could potentially fail like the previous cycle. In my opinion, that was a bit wishy-washy. At the end, I'll go through how I'm currently growing my Bitcoin stack. And yes, as always, this video is not financial advice. Please remember to invest accordingly. But let's keep stacking those sats. So first things first, halving is around the corner. This is like catalyst number one, obviously, but not the be all and end all. It may well be a flash in the pan non-event. A lot of people do hype this up as the best thing in the world. The reality is not, right? It's more after what happens with halving more than anything. So when we talk about it, it's going to be slashed in half in terms of the reward. That's going to reduce the amount of outflows for the, the supply, and it's going to slow down, which is good for scarcity, obviously. There's a couple of things I will come on to though. However, when we talk about it in obvious terms, this is what I want to talk about, is the data between 100 days and a year later. This is an out-of-date article. It's good though. So the first halving that we really had, we can see the price at the start was $12. 100 days later, yes, it was a couple of multiples higher, but a year later, it was a vast amount higher, vast amount. Remember, something big happened during this period. It was called Mt. Gox. It blew up. It wasn't good, right? 2016, this was roughly when I started getting into the crypto market a long time ago. And you can see at the start of the halving, it was $663, which is fine. Okay, I know. But 100 days later, it was, it was lower. And then a year from that, it was 2,550. By the way, maybe about, I don't know, 6 months after that, maybe even less than that, 4 months after that, it was going towards 20K. So just to give you an idea of why the future is kind of important here. When we talk about the previous one, obviously the data isn't here yet, but we know what the numbers are. So you can see at the start of the halving, it was 8,700. It was up roughly 30% prior to, 100 days later. And then most importantly, it was roughly around $55,000 a year later, which is cool. But what happened? Well, we kind of know what happened. Not long after that, we had a bit of a problem. Just saying. Luna, UST, that all crumbled. That is one of the pain points that we've got to look at. So moving forward into the future, as you can imagine, yes, we have got this new halving countdown coming along. So in 100 days time, we could see where we're at, and then it could get very interesting. But what I want to know, boys and girls, please comment below what you think the pricing of Bitcoin will be at halving. The closest will get a nice little shout out on one of my videos after halving. The next thing we need to talk about literally is market cycle methodology, right? We know that Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin will always fluctuate in terms of a bull market, obviously. So we've got Catalyst A, we've got halving. Catalyst B is following the 4-year cycle. We're in one, right? So we're looking relatively good. This is the total market. I've did this before in a prior video, and we could run up until 2025, basically, right? And a bit longer. Depends on momentum. Now, on my shelf below here, you can see it, trading the zone. The first thing in the first 30 minutes of that video, especially if you're listening to it or reading it or whatever, it will tell you about ideology and beliefs and bias, right? A lot of people think that the market is going to do something because something is a pre-thing. The 4-year cycle is one of them. Halving is another thing. But what people forget here is hype, demand, supply and demand, and falling into that hype is huge. This is the thing that makes it all work. Now, yes, this might be the last ever 4-year cycle. Let's get onto it. But the reality is here, people know what's happening. Retail people who are going to come into the market as new will not get this. They will come in because they see big green candles and Bitcoin's gone to a very, very high price. Wait for it. Existing people like ourselves who've been watching videos and been creating content for a long, long time will know how this works. You will see the run up and the hype will come. So going back to what I said, 100 days later, sometimes not really an event, but a year later, wow. Where does that come from? Well, it's the supply element. It's the scarcity element, right? And when you put it into context with some green tick boxes, we're in a bull cycle. Halving, scarcity. And then I'm going to talk about something else which might blow your brains. Sorry, bear with me. The left translated cycle. We are looking at a potential theory. It's a theory, not a model. Now, going back to that book just there, models break. Models don't work. My personal opinion too, as well as that book's. Often you find that models don't work. They don't support the idea because it's based off fluff and bollocks. This is a theory that is based off the 4-year cycle, but it's also got past elements to it in terms of, are we going to see the last 4-year cycle? That would indicate a potential left translated cycle where we do blow up pretty quickly and then we kind of come cataclysmically down. That's going to be a pain point if that does happen due to a certain thing that happened in crypto all the time. Companies going bust and over leverage, right? It's happened in the past. So this could happen, keyword could, but it might not, right? This is a thing, pain point. This could be a pain point, right? Could create a massive oof in Bitcoin and it could slaughter everything very, very quickly because everyone gets wrecked. Just saying, because people might not be actually expecting this move, which is why you need to stack your Satoshis, which is why I'm going to tell you why you need Bitcoin, right? So that's an important factor. The biggest underlying problem with this is we've never had one before in crypto market. So we need to kind of look at this and think, well, it might happen, but it might not. The 4-year cycle and that model will eventually shatter into pieces. It works for so long, like I said before, but models tend to break. So that could be a huge factor we need to consider. The final factor is the obvious one, is this time is different with the left translated cycle. We've also got ETFs, BlackRock, Fidelity, all these I've talked about multiple times are buying up Bitcoin. If they're buying up OTC from the miners and miners are getting paid a little bit of a premium to stay alive and all that kind of good stuff, and they want the Bitcoin, good. The biggest thing here, which is changing everything, is you're halving the amount that they're buying, right? So if you think 900 per day is going into the market, then it's going to halve. Okay, where are they going to get the rest of their Bitcoin from? They're going to get that from the exchanges, from other people selling OTC. That's going to make it harder. If they're buying on an open exchange like Coinbase, for example, it's because they can only use that really, let's be honest. But you get the idea. It will create a supply shock. That will then create the price to go a bit crazy, which is why we're going to go onto the price now. If you've not yet done so, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe. There's about 20% of people who watch my videos are only subscribers. There's another like 80% that don't. Please do. Anyways, let's talk about it. This is the history of Bitcoin. It's looking relatively awesome, right? And you can see we've somewhat slingshotted over the last year. But we need to look at obvious levels and pain points, right? If this is a left translated cycle, the blow off will be pretty immense, but it'll be also short, sharp, sweet, and might well hurt altcoins. Just saying. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. So what I look at more than anything is Fibonacci extension levels going from the high of the previous swing to the low of the, the cycle essentially. And this is where we are. We are currently above previous all-time highs. That's obvious, right? Where do we go from here? Now, certain Fibonacci levels that I have got is a 1.272, I got the 1.618, and I got the 2.618 and the 3.618, right? These are the kind of the obvious. Now, let me go through why I use these numbers. Now, I'm not going to be, a lot of people cheat and they use a log scale. Don't use a log scale because you're going to get inflated, stupid ass numbers. It doesn't really work when the prices go this high for obvious reasons, right? Because when we talk about previous cycles, right? When you look at previous all-time highs in terms of the growth, yeah, cool. We went from 20K to 69. That to me was a bit piss poor. Just going to say that. Why was that piss poor? Because the previous cycles were very, very different. The reason why this failed so cataclysmically was because of the leverage element to it, with Luna collapsing, and it kind of came about at a wrong point and it bankrupted a lot of people and funds. People got a bit too greedy. This is more of an obvious kind of run. At the moment, there's not much leverage kind of involved yet. Keyword is yet. It will probably change. So when we look at that, cool. When we look at prior all-time highs and we go right into the delve of the deeps of the world, you can see here very, very clearly how we went from $1,000, give or take, melted into a Mt. Gox crash, and then we flew up to the moon. This was the big boy cycle. I don't think we're ever going to repeat that feat, personally. But yeah, a lot of people cheat by going onto the log scale, but personally, it's like a bit wishy-washy. I'll show you. Let me explain. Because when you go to the log scale, you see it like this, right? You see it in a very, very different light, and it looks very, very good for a data point of view. So if you look at this prior high here, and then you go and do a Fibonacci to there, it looks really good when it starts looking at like certain levels and like 30K, but it completely doesn't even get, you know what I mean? It's kind of a bit wishy-washy. So I don't like to look at it, let's be honest, because it gets a bit horrible. When we look at the prior one, this one's a really good one, actually. If you look at this previous all-time high, this low, you can see where it kind of tops out around this 618 level. So yeah, it gets okay, it's all right, it works, but I don't like using it because when you start looking at this, you start getting some stupid inflated numbers very, very quickly. It doesn't really make sense. Like, yeah, cool, but reality is you got to look at actual, when you're this high, you got to look at the obvious because it's kind of there for you. It's already there. You don't have to worry about it. That makes sense? Good. Anyway, maybe moving forward. So personally, I've always had an eye on a number. And the reason why I like to have an eye on a number is for one of two reasons. Now, what we're looking at here is how many multiples are we going to make from the previous all-time high? Last cycle was 3x. Not great. 3 and a bit, actually, to be fair. Okay, fine. Prior cycle to that was obviously about, I think, 16, and then before that was 35, something. I can't remember. Off the top of the head. But it was a decent chunk. I think we're going to get a much bigger run. I think 69 to 70,000 is pretty good. I've always said 200K looks like a really good, obvious kind of sticking point for Bitcoin. Why? So when you put in $200,000 as a potential target, it's roughly $4 trillion. Now, I know people are going to be disappointed thinking, well, how do you know what about? It's all based off potential supply, demand, and obviously timing and length of time. Bitcoin, yeah, cool, could be trillions, and it already is trillions. It's roughly 1.4 trillion. Now, that isn't a massive amount of multiples from the current price. If you're going to go from previous all-time high, cool. But we've got to have a look at an idea of, in terms of a potential range of where it can go. 200K for me is the low point. Just going to put that point out there. Now, I've always said between $4 and $6 trillion will be where Bitcoin could potentially go very, very quickly in terms of a very, very obvious run, because it's not crazy amounts versus the previous cycle, but you got to remember the higher this goes, the harder it's going to be to keep going, right? It's kind of obvious in terms of multiples, even though we've got ETFs and stuff. Yeah. So when we start looking at that, that's that. If we like double that and put 400K, it's about 8. That's pretty on the high side. So you're talking 200 to 300K in this cycle. A lot of people think a lot higher than me. I know that. But when we look at the kind of obvious is, what if it is a left translated cycle? What if the bull market ends prematurely? What if certain things happen? Or what about if the market doesn't stop and it keeps going forever, right? Just saying. Could be a possibility. Probably not going to happen though. So when we look at that, that's 6 trillion. When we look at the market cap of gold and other big investments, that is one asset at potentially $6 trillion value worth, right? That's crazy. So 200 to 300K in my eyes up very, very nicely, bear with me, to this kind of region of these two extension levels when you were looking at it in terms of obvious. Now, it looks fucking crazy on the charts, but that to me is where, if we ever get there, just saying, I will be incredibly twitchy, just saying. I think these are unbelievable numbers, right? Now, a lot of people won't obviously like what I'm talking about or agree with me, but when we remove the fib and when we look at like prior levels, right? And so, as I said before, right, when we look at this previous all-time high to the low, look at where, I'm just saying, hold on, bear with me. That's roughly it. This is kind of the same sort of situation where we're in between these two regions again, right? So when we look at that, we're going off past data. We are in between the higher two. Now, we failed in these two in the previous cycle. Now, as I said before, right, we had a bit of a problem last cycle. UST collapsed. I don't think we had a full bull run in the previous cycle. I was expecting to go to roughly 80 to 90K beyond this point, give or take around this point. We failed massively, in my opinion. That's what I thought anyways, back in the day. I wasn't really fulfilled in the previous cycle. So that is kind of my ideology of those two numbers, hence why I talked about in terms of market cap instead of doing it on there. So when we look at that, that kind of gives us a good little run. If we're talking from the prior all-time high towards that box, we're looking at a 3 to 4 nearly X. Not massive amount. But when you think about growing wealth, you need to put your money where your mouth is in terms of altcoins. And those altcoins then have to do something quite nicely, which I'm going to talk about. Now, I've talked about it before. This side of it is what you want to look at. There will be an opportunity where you are buying altcoins and they will be worth more in the BTC value. Therefore, you can get free Satoshi. Some are doing absolutely awful. Some are doing amazing. Look at Near Protocol, for example. It's slowly trickling up. That could be worth a lot more. So what I do, and I've talked about it in multiple videos, is I look for an opportunity to buy altcoins when they're low, flip them for Bitcoin when the dominance drops. That's all I'm going to say. Just saying. And to finish off on this wild video kind of run, that yes, there's a lot of people talk about the path to 1 million. And yeah, I do feel that we could be looking at some crazy numbers in the next coming years. But the problem we have is a lot of people feel, and I think people believe, that it will happen very quickly to 1 million or to 500,000, whatever. I don't think it will. I think it's a lot harder. We're going to talk about ETFs here. Maybe a little bit of manipulation, just saying. There's not going to be enough people wanting to buy it that quickly to enable the price to go up, because it's going to create havoc in the institutional world. It's not going to just go bang. Now, yes, it could well go crazy numbers up to, say, 300K, 200K very quickly in terms of the eyes of the traditional market, right? But to us, it might be pretty slow, just saying. So that situation's huge. I know there's people within my own community. I know there's people that I see on YouTube quite a lot. And there's people in the comment section that do physically believe that in the next 2 years, Bitcoin is going to be absolutely crazy prices. I don't think that. I think between 200 and 300K is more than enough in terms of a growth for prior cycle, in terms of the data and the slow chugging up and the supply, and that change in the scarcity element of demand is obviously increasing as well, is obvious, right? Too many people just think that this thing's just going to keep going up and up and up forever. There's going to be a point where this will go into a bit of an ugly downtrend at some point, and we are at all-time high levels. We are going to go much higher because that's what the data tells us. The problem is, when it gets too high, people will start believing even more, and it's going to create that more exit liquidity for a lot of people, and that could create a problem. So we've got to look at that factor. By the way, this interest here back in the day, that's really interesting to look at. I think that was literally when John McAfee was saying it's going to go to 1 million, and if it didn't, he would eat his willy. Sadly, he's passed away since then, but hey. Anyways, so there we go. I know there's a lot of waffle in there, but I had to kind of justify why I would talk about a potential price prediction for Bitcoin in that level. I have always maintained that level in terms of a situation for Bitcoin to go roughly between there. It feels like the price cycle was a bit of a wishy-washy one. This one could be much different versus, obviously, if we can, disclaimer here, if we can stop the leverage part of it and companies going bankrupt and stuff like that, that could be huge. But anyways, video on the screen, that might help you in terms of taking profit. You probably will need that in a couple of months' time.